In Hebrew scripture, the 2 points from which the fulcrum of history swings are the Exodus, being drawn out of Egypt, and the exile, being forced into Babylon, being forced out of their homes. The Exodus is centered around the second book of the Bible, which thankfully is called Exodus. And it tells the story of the people's suffering, of God's awareness of their suffering, and God's action in response to that suffering. Exodus is the ongoing story of the people of God founded in Genesis. It picks up where the story left off. A generation or generations after Joseph saved Israel in Egypt. Exodus tells the story of Moses, but it begins with Pharaoh. And I love this from the King James Version. Now there arose a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. Isn't that so stately? See, Exodus begins with a crisis. Pharaoh forgot his own history, how the Jews actually saved Egypt from famine. And he saw the Israelites not as a blessing, but as a curse. And so he oppressed them and tried to get rid of them. Oppression through work, through slavery, through the killing of young Hebrew boys, trying to make bricks without straw, not giving them any rest. And so when the people had nothing, what would they hold on to? God. And God heard their groanings. God remembered his covenant with them. God looked upon them. God took notice of them. I love the verbs in this story, in this verse. God would prove to be more powerful than the most powerful earthly ruler. And it's creation itself that would crash onto Pharaoh. God's people would be free. Freedom isn't granted by Pharaoh or the world, but by God. And then we know they go from slavery into the wilderness. The wilderness wanderings that went on for a whole generation were a turn from serving to worshiping. So serving Pharaoh to worshiping Yahweh. And what is really funny, can you guys tell these are the same word in Hebrew? It's the same word for serving Pharaoh and serving or worshiping God. And it's this whole change in how we relate to our king. Kind of cool. One of my favorite nerd things. Of course, Pharaoh was a relentless taskmaster who oppressed the people and forced them to work and work and work. And Yahweh, God, was the God of the universe who could give them what they could not give themselves. Everything. Manna in the wilderness. And Sabbath. We first hear about Sabbath in the wilderness. That's where they first are given the command for Sabbath rest. So it's in stark contrast for the Hebrew people. And it's in this Exodus that Israel begins the process towards becoming a nation. They wander in the wilderness for 40 years. They come out of the wilderness and into a land flowing with milk and honey. And they begin the process of becoming a nation. Well, what do? They want a king to rule over them. So I have this bet. You see this fun thing with the arrows. We're going forwards, but now we're going backwards. It would be better to go back to Egypt, they would say sometimes in the wilderness. Kings, by and large, if you remember King Josiah and others we've talked about in the last, since I came here, kings, by and large, did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Kings, their lack of faith in God, the God of Israel, created the conditions for exile. So we've got these two kind of bookends, these two fulcrum to swing from. Exodus, becoming a nation; exile, losing that sense of nation. At the Exodus, I'm going too fast. At the Exodus, Israel began the process toward becoming a nation, and the exile, however, signaled the loss of Israel's status as an independent nation. They were taken away into a new land with new customs and new rules and rulers. The exile happened about 587 to 515 before Jesus, BCE. The exile was the period when Jerusalem was brutally sacked. People encountered incredible violence and death. Jerusalem was burned and the temple with it was destroyed. And much of the population of Judah was deported into captivity in Babylonia. And you can see here on the map. In Egypt, in the exile, they come through here and enter, and then in exile, they go way a far field, taken. It's a total loss. It's a total loss of an ability to worship God as they know God. They have no temple. They have no priest. They have no king. They have no way of holding customs. They were at the edge of everything they knew. Somewhere between 3,000 and 30,000 people were taken away, which was a significant part of the population in the world of that time. And the exile was a time marked with violence and loss and grief. Jerusalem was destroyed, their spiritual home flattened, and the people were captured and carried away. Are we getting the sense of the depth of loss in exile? Can we connect it at all to the exiles in our own life? It's a metaphor, so there's a yes and a no. But we know that life doesn't come without loss, right? So we could return to these questions. What do we hold on to when we've lost everything? What do we want to remember and pass on to the next generation? How would you keep going amid unspeakable loss? What is the power of hope?